'cause I'm podunk raised on firewood faith and dirt road days, with a heart that don't break, it just bends, and a barn full of four-legged friends. Ain't fancy, but it's ours to claim, that new podunk name.
Y'all, welcome to the Podunk Almanac, where we take the kind of conversations most folks have leaning on the fence post and turn them into something you can carry with you through the week. Y'all, it's Herd Logic Tuesday, the day we slow things down just enough to look at the hidden gears turning inside a working herd. Around here, we don't dress things up or talk in circles. We get straight to the truth of how animals think, how they move, and how those quiet decisions they make shape the whole operation, whether you notice them or not. There's something about a goat herd early in the morning that tells you more truth than most people ever pick up on. Before the sun clears the tree line and before anybody's had time to stir up trouble, the herd is already taking its own quiet way. You can see who moves first, who hangs back, who cuts a line straight to the feeder, and who waits for permission that never gets spoken out loud. That's the thing about goats. They don't waste time pretending. Their order is written in motion, in glances, and the way one shoulder leans just a little too confidently into another. If you're willing to stand still long enough, you'll see the whole story unfold without a single sound. People think goats are chaotic, stubborn, or unpredictable, but that's only because they're watching the wrong things. They're looking at the noise instead of the structure underneath it. A goat herd isn't a pile of personalities bouncing around. It's a system with rules older than any fence line you've ever built. And when you start paying attention to how that system forms, how dominance is earned, how space is negotiated, how pressure is applied and released, you start to understand why some herds stay steady while others fall apart at the seams. So today, we're starting our first 3-week run on goats by digging into two things that matter most on day one: how goats establish their pecking order, and what makes a structurally sound goat worth your time. All right, before we get too deep into the mechanics of dominance and structure, it helps to lay out the simple truth that goats don't operate on chance. So let's start with today's ground check. Every herd, no matter how small or how mixed, settles into an order that keeps the peace more than it stirs it. Folks who only see the headbutting think the whole thing is chaos, but that's because they're catching the loudest moments instead of the steady ones. Most of the real decisions in a goat herd happen in silence. Who steps forward first? Who yields a few inches of space? And then who circles wide instead of cutting straight through the middle? These little choices stack up into a hierarchy that keeps the herd from burning energy on constant conflict. Understanding that quiet foundation is the first step to reading goats the right way. Another thing worth grounding yourself in is the idea that goats don't care about your plans, your schedule, or your preferences. They care about what works. They care about who can hold their ground, who can move another goat with a look, and who can keep themselves steady when the pressure rises. That's why the pecking order forms so quickly and so consistently. Y'all, it's a survival tool, not a personality contest. When you start seeing it that way, you stop taking their behavior personally and start recognizing the patterns that have been there long before you ever stepped into the pasture. The herd isn't reacting to you, they're reacting to each other. And you're just another piece of the landscape they're navigating. And before we talk about structure, about chest floors, tracking, bone, and all the things that separate a good goat from a goat that's going to cost you time, you need to understand that behavior and structure are tied together. A goat with a strong frame often carries itself with a kind of quiet confidence that shows up in the herd long before you ever put hands on it. A goat with weak structure often compensates with bluster or avoidance. These aren't hard rules, but they're patterns worth noticing. So as we move into the deeper parts of today's episode, keep this in mind. The herd is always telling you the truth, and the body is always backing it up. You just have to learn how to read both at the same time. Y'all, now let's get into today's herd logic. A goat herd doesn't wait for you to set the tone. The moment those animals step into a shared space, they begin sorting themselves out with a kind of quiet efficiency that most people miss entirely. The first signals are subtle. A head held a little higher, a shoulder angled just enough to claim a path, a goat that steps forward without hesitation, while another pauses for half a heartbeat. These tiny choices are the opening moves in a negotiation that decides who leads, who yields, and who sits somewhere in the middle. Goats don't need a referee or a meeting to figure this out. They read each other with a precision that comes from generations of survival, and the order they build is the backbone of how the herd functions day to day. When folks think of dominance in goats, they picture the loud moments, the headbutting, the shoving, and the dust-ups that look dramatic from a distance. But those are just punctuation marks. The real hierarchy is built in the quiet exchanges, the ones that happen when nobody's paying attention. A dominant goat doesn't have to fight all the time. In fact, the strongest leaders rarely do. They hold their position through presence, through the way they move confidently into a space and expect others to shift without being told. A goat that constantly picks fights is usually insecure, trying to prove something the herd already knows isn't true. The real power sits in the animals that don't need to make a scene. One of the clearest signs of hierarchy is how goats handle pressure. When two goats approach the same resource, whether it be feed, water, shade, or a mineral block, one of them will apply a little pressure and the other will either hold or yield. That moment tells you everything. A goat that yields quickly is acknowledging the other's position. A goat that holds its ground is testing the balance. And a goat that steps forward with calm certainty is usually sitting near the top of the order. These exchanges happen dozens of times a day, and each one reinforces the structure the herd relies on. If you watch closely, you'll see that the goats know exactly where they stand long before you do. Another piece of the puzzle is how goats use space. Dominant goats claim the best pass, the cleanest angles, and the most efficient route without hesitation. Subordinate goats learn to walk around them, take wider arcs, or wait for an opening. This isn't fear, it's respect for the system that keeps the herd from wasting energy on constant conflict. When a goat cuts another off cleanly, the other steps aside without fuss. That's not aggression. That's communication. It's the herd saying, we know the order and we're sticking to it. When you start reading these movements, the whole herd becomes easier to understand. Age and experience play a role, but they aren't the whole story. Y'all, a young goat with strong instincts and a confident frame can climb the ranks faster than an older goat that lost a step. Likewise, a goat that's been pushed around in one herd might rise in another if the dynamics shift. The hierarchy isn't fixed, it's responsive. It changes with injury, with new additions, with the seasons, and with the natural ebb and flow of confidence. That's why paying attention matters. A goat that suddenly drops in rank might be telling you something about its health long before symptoms show up. Personality also threads its way into the hierarchy, but not in the way people think. Y'all, a bold goat isn't automatically dominant, and a quiet goat isn't automatically submissive. What matters is consistency. A goat that consistently steps forward, consistently holds its ground, and consistently reads the herd accurately will rise. A goat that misreads pressure, either by pushing too hard or backing down too quickly, will struggle to find its place. The herd rewards steadiness, not theatrics. And once you see that, you stop labeling goats as mean or timid and start understanding them as individuals navigating a system with rules older than any barn you've ever built. Now, the most fascinating part of pecking order is how quickly goats establish it when the herd changes. Add a new goat, the whole system shifts like a deck of cards being reshuffled. The first few hours tell you everything. Who challenges, who avoids, and who tests the edges. It also tells you who stands firm. These early interactions set the tone for weeks to come. If you watch closely, you'll see the goats don't just react, they strategize. They test boundaries, read responses, and adjust their approach until the order settles into something stable. It's not chaos, it's calibrated. And once the hierarchy is set, the herd becomes more efficient. Feeding goes smoother, movement becomes predictable, the stress drops. The goats know who leads, who follows, and who fills the space in between. When you understand this system, you stop trying to force your own order onto the herd and start working with one that's already built. That's the heart of herd logic. Learning to read the language goats speak naturally, so you can manage them with clarity instead of confusion. And once you see how they establish their pecking order, you're ready to understand the next layer. The structure that often determines who rises and who falls. Y'all, now let's shift gears into the blueprint. A discussion about what makes a structurally sound goat and why it matters. When you start talking about structure in goats, you're talking about the foundation everything else is built on. A goat can have all the personality in the world, all the flash, all the attitude, but if the frame underneath it is weak, you're looking at an animal that's going to cost you time, money, and probably a little pride before it's all said and done. Structure isn't about winning shows or impressing neighbors. It's about longevity, efficiency, and the ability to hold up under real-world pressure. A structurally sound goat moves cleaner, eats better, handles stress with more resilience, and stays productive longer. That's why the first thing any serious breeder learns is to evaluate the skeleton, not the shine. One of the most important pieces of structure is the chest floor. A wide, open chest floor tells you the goat has room for the heart and lungs to do their job without being cramped. It also tells you the animal has the kind of skeletal width that supports muscle, stamina, and overall power. When you see a narrow chest floor, you're looking at a goat that's going to struggle with endurance, struggle with growth, and struggle with the kind of workload a real program demands. A wide chest floor isn't just a visual preference, it's a functional requirement. It's the difference between a goat that thrives and a goat that survives. Tracking is another major indicator of structural soundness. When a goat walks, the hind feet should stand cleanly in the path of the front feet. That straight, efficient movement tells you that joints are aligned. The hips are balanced and the animal isn't wasting energy with every step. Goats that track wide, track narrow, or swing their legs out like a gate in the wind are telling you something is off. Maybe it's the hips, maybe it's the knees, maybe it's the pasterns, but whatever it is, it's going to show up later as wear and tear. A goat that moves cleanly is a goat that ages well. A goat that moves sloppy is a goat that breaks down early. Bone is another piece people overlook. Not heavy bone for the sake of bulk, but strong, clean bone that supports the frame without looking coarse. Good bone gives the goat stability. It gives the ability to handle uneven ground, sudden pressure, and the day-to-day demand of herd life. Thin-boned goats might look refined, but they often lack the durability needed for breeding, kidding, and holding their own in a mixed herd. Strong bones don't make a goat dominant, but it does give them the physical confidence that's often shown up in their behavior. Structure and hierarchy aren't the same thing, but they're not strangers either. Top line is another area where structures tell the truth. A strong level top line means the goat can carry weight effectively and maintain balance even when conditions get rough. A weak top line, one that dips, sways, or rolls, puts strain on the spine and the supporting muscles. Over time, that strain shows up as stiffness, soreness, or a general lack of power. Goats with weak top lines often struggle to keep condition, especially during stressful seasons. A strong top line, on the other hand, supports everything from movement to stamina to overall health. It's one of the clearest indicators of long-term soundness. Then there's the matter of feet and pasterns. You can have the best chest floor, the cleanest tracking, and the strongest bone in the world, but if the feet are weak, the whole animal is compromised. Goats live on their feet. They climb, they jump, they pivot, they brace, and they navigate terrain that would make a cow think twice. Strong pasterns absorb shock and protect the joints. Weak pasterns collapse under pressure, leading to lameness, fatigue, and early breakdown. When you're evaluating structure, the feet are the truth tellers. They don't lie, and they don't hide problems for long. A structurally sound goat isn't just built well, it carries itself differently. There's a steadiness in the way it moves, a confidence in the way it stands, and a kind of quiet authority that shows up even in the herd's social order. These goats don't have to fight for position, their bodies do the talking. A goat with strong structure often rises in the hierarchy without ever throwing a head. Meanwhile, goats with weak frames often overcompensate, either by avoiding pressure or by picking fights they can't win. Structure influences behavior more than most people realize. And once you see that connection, you can't unsee it at all. Y'all, at the end of the day, structure is about respect. Respect for the animal, respect for the work, and respect for the future of your program. A goat with a strong frame gives you options. It gives you longevity. It gives you consistency. A goat with weak structure gives you headaches, vet bills. It gives you problems you could have avoided if you'd known what to look for. When you understand what makes a goat structurally sound, you stop settling for good enough and start building something that lasts. And that's the whole point of the blueprint. Making decisions today that pay off for years down the line. For today's back road reflection, when you step back from all the details, the chest floor, the tracking, the pressure responses, the quiet negotiations, you start to realize goats aren't nearly as complicated as folks make them out to be. They're honest, they're consistent. They're creatures that tell the truth with their bodies long before they ever tell it with their behavior. A goat that stands solid usually lives solid. A goat that moves clean usually thinks clean. And a goat that knows its place in the herd usually knows its place in the world. There's a kind of peace in that, a simplicity that reminds you not everything needs to be overthought or overmanaged. Y'all, out on the back roads, you learn pretty quick that the animals who hold up year after year aren't the loud ones or the flashy ones. They are the steady ones. The ones that don't limp after a hard rain. The ones that don't panic when the wind shifts. The ones that don't crumble when the herd gets stirred up. Structure and behavior weave together into a kind of quiet reliability. And once you've seen it, you start valuing different things. You stop chasing the goat that looks good in a picture and start paying attention to the ones that move right when nobody's watching. And maybe that's the real lesson tucked inside all this talk about hierarchy and structure. The truth shows up in the small things. In the way a goat steps, in the way it holds its head, in the way it handles pressure without making a fuss. Those little details tell you more about the future of your herd than any pedigree or sales pitch ever will. Out here, the back roads teach you to trust what's real, not what's loud. And goats, for all their quirks, are some of the realest teachers you'll ever have. Y'all, don't forget the podunk proverb. A crooked frame don't stand straight when the wind shows up. Y'all, before we shift out of today's deep dive, it helps to bring everything back to the practical side of working goats. The hierarchy I discussed today isn't just an interesting behavior pattern, it's a tool you can use. Once you know who leads, who yields, and who hangs back, you can feed more efficiently, introduce new goats with less stress, and catch early signs of trouble long before they turn into real problems. Structure works the same way. When you know what a sound frame looks like, you start making cleaner decisions about who to keep, who to move on, and who's worth building a program around. As you move through the week, pay attention to the small signals. Who steps forward first? Who shifts their weight when pressure rises? Who moves clean and who moves crooked? These aren't just observations. They're the early indicators of how your herd will handle real-world conditions. The more you watch, the more these patterns start to stand out without effort. That's the whole point of herd logic. Turning instinct into informed habits. Next Tuesday, we'll build on this foundation by digging into how goats respond to stress, pressure, and environmental changes. We'll break down the early warning signs, posture shifts, movement changes, feeding behavior that tell you something's brewing long before it becomes obvious. If today was about understanding order and structure, next week is about understanding responses. That's the piece that keeps a herd steady when the weather turns, the routine shifts, or the unexpected shows up at the gate. There's a certain kind of quiet that settles over a herd once you've spent enough time watching them. The kind that reminds you how much of their world runs on patterns older than anything we build or plan. Goats don't complicate things the way people do. They show you who they are in the way they move, the way they stand, the way they handle the little pressures that come with living shoulder to shoulder in a group. Spending a day talking through their hierarchy and their structure isn't just about learning facts. It's about learning to see the herd with clearer eyes. And once you start seeing them that way, the whole operation feels different, steadier, and more grounded. Understanding animals isn't about memorizing rules. It's about paying attention. The pecking order isn't something you enforce. It's something you observe. Structure isn't something you guess at. It's something you read like a map. When you put those two pieces together, you start recognizing the quiet leaders, the steady movers, the ones that hold the herd together without ever making a fuss. That kind of awareness changes the way you move through your pasture, the way you make decisions, the way you read the small things that used to slip past unnoticed. So as you head back into your own pasture, barn, or hillside, let today's ideas settle into the background of how you watch your goats. Let the small details speak a little louder. Let the herd show you what it's been showing you all along. This is the kind of work that builds on itself, day after day, season after season. For now, let the dust settle, let the patterns rise to the surface, and let the herd keep teaching it in the quiet ways they always do.